Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and Progress Chef. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead, but first, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, or you'd like to rewatch, share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions for Brittany and Michelle, we want you to send those in using the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab. And this is where we want you to discuss with the rest of the audience, chime in on today's discussion, be part of our conversation. And finally, at the conclusion of this webinar, we will be giving out 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. Our webinar topic today is Achieve DevOps Success While Closing Skill Gaps. And I'm joined today by Brittany Woods, Server Automation Manager at H&R Block, and Michelle Sebick, DevOps and Automation Solutions Manager at Progress Chef. Brittany and Michelle, thank you both so much for being here with me. I'm going to give you the floor.
Thanks for having us. I'm very, very excited. Brittany, thank you. I don't know if everyone knows what a privilege it is today, talking with you and Taro, talking about the digital transformation and how DevOps really helps fill those skills gaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Super excited to talk to you, Michelle. It's been great to meet you as we've, talked. And yeah, thanks.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit? And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat because we'll be more than happy to answer them. But I'm so intrigued and interested in your experience, how using Chef is a catalyst that sparked the DevOps and shifting that security to the left to address those major pain points. So why don't we get started?
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit of background about me. So I was previously an automation engineer with Carfax. And before that, I was a system administrator with Jack Henry and Associates. And basically in both of those roles, I worked with Chef. Specifically at Carfax, we implemented Chef from the ground up. And I don't want to say that was the start of our DevOps journey, because certainly Carfax was on a journey well before that. But it was really a catalyst for transitioning, the historical operations side into understanding, the plight of development teams and understanding code delivery, CI/CD pipelines, and speaking the same language. And then when I joined H&R Block, we're kind of doing the same thing. H&R Block has been on a several years journey of, shifting left, promoting autonomous teams, allowing them to get to market faster with whatever feature or product they're working to deliver. And part of that has been transitioning more into the DevOps space. And so we've been leveraging Chef to help not only with that transition, but to help facilitate the building of those autonomous teams and getting the items that they need to manage in their hands while still complying with, regulatory requirements like SOX requirements and things like that. So my role from Carfax to H&R Block is very similar, except now I went from lead cloud automation engineer at H&R Block to now I'm managing the server automation team, and that's our focus.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting because we know that DevOps and policy is code and all of that, everything is code, it seems to be. And I know we're on the forefront of that. And it's interesting that you use Chef in all those examples. So I appreciate that. And I'd like to hear more about some of the challenges that you and your team face that are pervasive in other organizations as well. Because I'm sure our pain points are universal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So a lot of companies, sort of regardless where they're at in their DevOps journey, but certainly when they're early on in that DevOps, mentality shift, if you will, there's still a lot of the challenges that you see pre-DevOps, which is siloed knowledge, lack of skills that are needed to be able to make that transition. And those are certainly pervasive, I think, across any organization. particularly when you talk about skills. So as you move toward DevOps, you're kind of making it, the developers or the development teams, not necessarily responsibility, but within their span of focus and control, their underlying architecture and infrastructure. And so that becomes kind of, instead of it being something that, historically somebody else handled and it was just, there and waiting for them, it becomes something that they have to consider in their delivery timelines and in their project planning for various feature rollouts. So, I think that we've seen that. We saw that at Carfax. We see that, at H&R Block. And so shifting everything to code helps eliminate those silos. And then you transition your ops teams into, more platform focused. So we're providing, instead of a service of managing all of your infrastructure, we're providing a service of managing a platform that allows you to do that yourself, without having the burden of doing that, by hand. And it being as code also, when I talked about siloed knowledge, it being as code, it also, means that everybody's speaking a common language, which is something I've talked about in the past. So as everybody speaks that common language, they can, look at the code. They can, in this case for Chef, they can look at the cookbook and say, this application has this Tomcat config. So I understand that. So it gets rid of that mystery and that, smoke and mist that kind of surrounds all these microservices that you have in your organization.
Right. So, and it's so interesting because, in software, we have the flexibility of knowing one software or one product, and we're able to take it throughout different industries. And it's interesting, from Carfax to H&R Block, we see time and time again that there's an opportunity. And what's so interesting, and I know that you and I have talked, but tell me a little bit more about your Upskill, Rescale, and Retool, because I love that. For those that aren't familiar with this is a Brittany-ism, and it's really how the lack of skills in DevOps bringing together that gap and closing that gap with the skills.
Yeah. So I mean, it's something that people don't often talk about. Like, they talk about how they implemented a technology, or, my organization, for example, like, say I'm, on a conference stage, we implemented Kubernetes, and you don't really talk about how you got your engineers to that point. You just talk about, we did X, Y, and Z to make it happen. And so, over the last several years, I've been pretty passionate about that upskill, reskill mentality. And it's really like, it's evident in the practice of DevOps, like how powerful that can be. Because you're not moving to a no ops model. You're not getting rid of your operations teams. What it boils down to is you're reskilling them. You're taking their expertise and lending it to platforms or services, as opposed to, clicking buttons and building servers or whatever. And so I'm pretty passionate about, organizations taking the time to invest in the people that they have and invest in the knowledge that you have, and leverage these for lack of better phrasing, these DevOps tools to help facilitate that forward motion, not just for your organization, but for their careers as well. So, I think it's applicable to any organization. Like you mentioned, the differences between Carfax and H&R Block. One is big data and one is, retail and financial services. So you can see it in both organizations, the importance of investing in reskilling and upskilling the engineers that you have. Because at the end of the day, like, if you can find a way to bridge those gaps, and like I said, we use Chef as one of them, not to put another shameless plug, but we use Chef as that catalyst to teach them a new skill, to get them more confident in scripting, to teach them, Ruby code and understand libraries and code delivery. So if you can find a tool that will allow you to bridge that divide that you have between dev and ops, it not only upskills and reskills, but it also, helps you close that gap as you move forward on your journey. So That was
That's
really long-winded. Sorry.
But it's one of my favorite things because I'm totally on track with that, especially DevOps. We know that, we need to shift left and we're going to save time and we're going to save money, but knowing the why behind that. And what's so nice is your take on that being an investment, because I think when you invest, it's not a cost when you invest in your people and do that transferable skills. And then, we can only go up from there. So let's talk a little bit more, because we know that organizations, enterprises are undergoing digital transformations everywhere. So they're shifting more towards automated approaches. Amen. Because humans make errors, and establishing fully automated teams. But we still need the humans. But through the process, what do you see are common mistakes that we take for granted or didn't think of when we go from zero to Internet of Things, digital transformation?
Right. So I think one of the things, I don't know that it's a mistake, I don't know that it's missed, but one of the things that often sort of gets put on the back burner, and this is sort of an answer to the last question as well, is education. And educating your users as you launch from 0 to 100 and as you move to these various automation platforms. And I think the importance is to look at these tools that you're bringing into your organization, look at them as platforms that have implications outside of your own team. So you have to think about scale. You have to think about educating your users, not just your existing users, but what does onboarding look like? How do you educate users that are coming into your organization? That's a huge part of the shift to automation and the shift to autonomous teams, and the shift from zero to IoT, right? So if you want to be successful as an organization, you have to consider those things up front, because it's not just a new tool that's serving a purpose. It's a new tool that somebody has to write the code for, that somebody has to support, that somebody has to, teach others how to leverage, because at the end of the day, we're all experts in our areas. Some of us have more niche areas than others, but nobody has a checklist of every tool or experience with every tool that your organization uses. So you have to consider the education facet of that. And I see a question in here too, and that kind of plays into what I'm talking about. It's asking, when it comes to skills requirements, what skills should InfoSec analysts have to work with DevOps groups? And I think one of the important pieces here is to understand how the things you're doing or the requirements that you're sending out to these teams as an analyst, understand the bigger picture of that. A good example is Log4j. So as an analyst, whenever you are looking into vulnerabilities, seeing what you might have in your environment, and interacting with these DevOps groups, understanding what Log4j is, which, obviously you understand what that is, but understanding how it might be there, what the implications of it are, and, all of the background behind that. So you can come to the conversation with the DevOps groups, sort of understanding their plight. So I think empathy is what I'm trying to get at. Empathy for the different groups, but having a baseline knowledge of the bigger picture of this is but a small piece that's part of this software that has this maintenance schedule that, is controlled by X group. You don't have to be an expert in all of the software. You just kind of have to follow the breadcrumbs. So I would say skills, like detective skills to dig into those breadcrumbs, would be a good go-to.
That was an excellent question. I like to think of it along the same way. It's the holistic. Sometimes we get so siloed. And that's what I really enjoy about DevOps and DevSecOps, is that we're working collaboratively and working so that everybody knows every part of it. So transparency is such a big part of it as well. And that holistic 5,000 foot view makes it good. Oh, that
Yeah.
was an excellent question.
Yeah.
So do you find that organizations that you've worked with or that you maybe have peers with are still trying to fight against that digital transformation and that shift left? Because it's always intriguing. Like, I think it's great. I drank the Kool-Aid. I see the results and how you can get to market faster and not have to be fined for compliance because we did that up front. But how do you see that?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say from an organization perspective that I see much resistance at this point. A lot of companies, even the long holdouts, a lot of companies are now shifting into more DevOps mentalities, right? But I think, again, going back to that education bit, it's about the users that you might be leaving behind, or the people that brought your environment to where it is, giving them a vested stake in the future. And I think that's where you start to see some resistance. It's the organizations like, where can I buy the DevOps? But you can't. Obviously, you can't buy the DevOps. It's the people and the practices and the culture that you build that actually gets you, that DevOps. So, making sure that as you do that, as you transition, you have all of those people can sometimes be difficult. But the best way I've found to combat that is to give those people, give those users a vested stake in the future. Give them what they need in order to, play a part in where you're going. I use Chef as an example again, but really any kind of tooling. If you as an organization say, I want to do the DevOps and I want us to start working in a more DevOps mentality. I want my teams to be more autonomous and in control of their own destiny. Understand what people are hearing when you deliver that message. Because if you're coming from a traditional organization, you as a system administrator hear that and you say, well, wait a minute. If they're managing their servers, what am I managing? What do I do? And how do I fit into that? And so that's when the fear, uncertainty, and doubt takes over. And, everybody kind of digs their heels in and is like, let's slow this bus down. We don't want to do that. So, in that messaging, make sure you say, like, while we're going to move this into their span of control, we're, shifting and everything's going to be managed as code. So we are going to invest in ensuring that you understand this platform or, this space. Make sure that the roles are clearly defined is essentially where I'm going. And because you said it earlier, when you bring in automation, somebody has to manage it. It's not like it just manages itself, right? So deliver that message as an organization instead of just saying, we're going to make people responsible for their own bits, right? Deliver, what does that mean for me? What's in it for me?
Right. Excellent point.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. So let's talk about that, moving along for like the best practices, since we're moving to that autonomous environment. And we know that automated is going to help us with compliance, help us with speed and money. What are some best practices you should consider when moving towards that, outside of the skills and outside of the training? And I think a key opportunity here is the messaging. I think it's so important. We sometimes think we don't need to know the why. And then once we know it, when we're trained in that, and that communication is so valuable, is there any other best practices that you can anchor onto that?
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty passionate about the education bit and the, upskilling and reskilling. But as you're moving forward, like, I would just say from a delivery perspective, as you move to more autonomous teams, make sure you kind of know what that means. So that doesn't just mean delivering platforms from an operations side, from a development side. I think it's important to also ensure that your organization is at a point where they have the tools necessary to be able to be autonomous, because maybe they haven't built out their own, environments, and maybe they have just kind of expected those to be there. So I think not just on the education front, but just from a pure, a pure delivery side, ensure that you're factoring in as you become a more autonomous team. Make sure you're factoring that, you're going to have to run your updates. You're going to have to cycle your infrastructure. You're going to have to consider your storage accounts and, whatever else you have, because those are all things that need managed and maintained. So if you are in a position where you're helping teams plan, so if you're in a lead position where you're helping plan capacity and sprints and all of that, if you're in an agile environment, factor that in. Features and feature delivery and development is what, kind of pays the bills. That is the user interaction with your organization. That is the value driver. But in order to get there, there's a host of things that have to happen too. So ensuring that you're giving that the proper attention, I think is pretty critical as well from a best practices standpoint.
Excellent. And, we do have a couple questions that I think that they fit in really well. I don't know if you saw them, but how DevSecOps can help with zero-day vulnerability. You want to take that one? Because I do love a zero-day vulnerability.
Yeah. So I think, with DevSecOps, you get team cohesion. And so really what this is everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody's opinions are heard. But what you also start to develop as you break down those silos and everybody's talking to each other and everybody's spans of control are, defined and understood. And it's kind of, everybody's kind of doing everything shifted left, et cetera. You eliminate those organizational crufty red tape barriers, right? So you eliminate those problems with communication. So I think the way it helps is it breaks that down. You all already have a working relationship anyway. It's not like, oh man, those security guys that I hear from only when there's bad news are sending me an email again. You've built that relationship. You're used to working together. Your environment has less potholes. It's more standardized. It has less red tape to get things done. Doesn't take you, a month to get a server anymore. You can do it when you snap your fingers. So these changes can happen faster to help you remediate that faster. But you also have that relationship there. So security guy is not feeling weird about going to, ops gal or vice versa. Security gal doesn't have a problem going to, ops dude. So.
Right, which is another one of the things. You're not coming in cold or coming in hot. Yeah. You have that established relationship. And I love the transparency of it because it's not the security that's at the end. It's the security is the whole way from the get-go. And that's gonna do some wonders. We have an excellent blog on zero-day vulnerability. I'll submit in there. And the other one, did you happen to see that this is exciting to me because this person is starting with DevOps with one of their groups. They're starting small so they could build the culture. However, we have some old timers that either don't see the value or don't want the training or they just don't want to change. There's nothing wrong with it. Do the same thing. It sounds like, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Let's do the same thing. Why would we do that? How can you get those types to buy in the culture and make them feel that they have a stake going forward? And Brittany, I'm going to beat you to the punch because I love what you said. We're investing. So not only are you kind of have to use it as what's in it for them. And how is this helping them? That's helping them, have a faster way of doing something. So Brittany, you're more eloquent, I'm sure of it. I get excited with that because I'm like, okay, we're going to invest in you. We're going to save you time. We're going to decrease your errors. And you're not going to have to do rework because who wants to do that? That's the most frustrating thing coding, right? Error, like where's
So believe it or not, and I don't know if my connection's weird or not. Things were breaking up, so I'm sorry if I talked over you, Michelle. Sorry about that.
No, you didn't.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So like from like historically, present day, I think you kind of find this in really any transformational situation. And I talked earlier about education, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and things like that. And almost in every case where I've run up on issues with something like, pushing DevOps and there being those people that are like, there's nothing wrong with the way we do it today. In almost every case, it was fear that was doing the talking. And it was a matter of, like I said, giving them that vested interest. So explaining to them, like, even though these things are changing, this is how it's changing. And this is going to open up all of this time that, if it's a system administrator, for example, and you're implementing an automated build system, and this is an example, but you let them know, like, even though you're used to doing this by hand, like, think of all the time that you spend doing that, and think of all this other stuff that you need to do, or you've wanted to do, or even that you've wanted to learn. We as an organization are now funding that for you. And we're saying, we want to free up these hours for you so you can do X, Y, and Z thing. So presenting it, like almost putting a salesman hat on, right? And presenting it from a sales perspective and saying, even though this is changing and different, and even though the company's going through this, this is how you fit. We're going to make sure that you fit. And then this is the tools you need to be able to, feel confident in that space, because that's an important piece too, is not just saying, you fit in this way, have fun. Because that's going to, feed that fear, right? They're going to be like, what if I can't do it? I've been an expert in this space for however many years. I don't know this new thing like the back of my hand, whereas I know the current environment like the back of my hand. So I would say in almost every single case, it's going to boil down to, if you really cut into the meat of the issue, it doesn't necessarily have to be that they don't want to change. It's that they're afraid to change because they're so confident in their current skill set. So combat that with education, with giving them a place, giving them, something exciting to look forward to.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. Change energizes us. Yeah. So when it comes to, let's talk a little bit about config. So when we're when we're making configuration standardized in the management process, how important of a role does document? Go on the skills gap, and I know every time I need to learn something, I go to my documentation. And how does the standardization of that config management process, what kind of role and how important is it with documentation?
Yeah, so I've always looked at, like, config management as an example, but really you can extend this to anything that you're doing. I've always looked at documentation as like a key piece in the success of scaling that across your organization. Because again, like, I don't look at these as one team is going to manage everything about this one tool. And so it's, all within that tiny silo. Config management is a good example where every time I've, had a hand in rolling it out, it's been an organizational effort. So it's not just the automation team or the system administrators or whatever that's rolling this out. They might be managing it at a core level, but ultimately their users are the business. So network engineers manage what they're rolling out. They manage their F5, they manage their firewall config. You have application teams managing their application config. And so in order to roll it out successfully at scale, you have to consider, how are they going to know what to do? So the question I always ask is, if you were somebody that walked in and you wanted to build, it's your first day, and somebody asked you to build out example applications environment, you wouldn't know that example application runs Tomcat with certain environment variables. You wouldn't know that it's running, Postgres, or it's using RabbitMQ. but you would know that I need to build example application. So from a config standpoint, if you build out your environment in a way that's well documented and that makes sense, so somebody can just be like, you know what, I'm going to apply the example app cookbook to these app servers, and I'm going to apply the example DB cookbook to these DB servers, and voila, I have my example, environment. If you build things out in a way that they can follow the documentation, again, follow those breadcrumbs, you're enabling scale across the organization with minimal management overhead. So that's the importance to me, is whether it's Kubernetes, whether you're documenting your, your cluster and all of the tools and rabbit hole that you want to go down for Kubernetes, or whether it's, Chef and you're documenting config management. It's important for somebody to be able to look at it and be like, okay, I have all the tools I need. I don't need to call, Brittany. I know exactly what I need to do. I don't have to rely on her, and I can do it myself.
Yeah. That's excellent. Yeah. I like it as the game plan, especially if I already have a cookbook and I could just plop it in there. I'm golden.
Right.
We have another question. Did you want to take this one too? I can read it off. I started off in ICT over 25 years ago. Great. And they trained and interned as a Unix and C analyst program. I'm currently a lead system administration, managing both development, test, and live production environments. So you are busy, very busy. The only transformation in my career is the public cloud adoption and the delivery of services. In my experiences, developers are not clued in. Yeah. To security and delivery issues and have to be managed. So what is the paradigm shift to DevOps outside automated tools such as Chef?
Yeah. So, you kind of, I don't want to say hit the nail on the head, but you kind of called out what the reason for the shift to like DevOps or DevSecOps is. And that is development teams historically, they've been pushing out changes to their applications. They've been pushing out features. They've been enhancing it and getting rid of bugs. They haven't necessarily been, at least in their span of control, clued into security requirements and this is my systems and, all of that. So the importance, or at least what I think you're asking for the paradigm shift, I think, is getting everyone at the same seat. So you as a system administrator, bridging that gap between the development teams and their level of understanding and really telling them, like, these are considerations that are important for you to make. And the earlier you make them within your code delivery process, and the more consideration you put into it, the less long-term impacts you're going to have, the less exposure we have as a company, the less problems you're going to have the security analyst knocking on your door for. So I think that is the shift. The shift is getting everyone at the same seat, everyone understanding and making considerations for the same things at the beginning of the process. So at the beginning of the development process, as opposed to the middle or the end. Yeah. Because historically it was development teams want to build a feature. They start working on the code. They send a message frantically to the system administrators that say, we need servers. We need things to make this code run. Here's our specs. And then at the very end of the pipe, you have security that's like, what about me? So if you move all of that left, move everybody to the beginning of the conversation, and you understand all of the pieces at play, that is the shift.
And it can be done. We've seen it. We've seen it in companies and or enterprises from small to large, that it's just something that we have seen the use cases and the pain points that if we can cut down on that time and have that openness, it's going to be good for everyone. So I would totally advocate for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have one more thought on that as well. And in some organizations that aren't necessarily pushing, this idea of DevSecOps, from the top, it is possible to operate in these ways from like a grassroots level and to be that, that bridge over that gap that says, you know what, I'm going to facilitate shifting this mentality. Ultimately, I believe that you have to you have to build this into your culture at some points. You have to, as an organization, take steps necessary to make, things like DevOps successful. But at the same time, I also think the beauty of it is that you can operate in that way, even as a system administrator. Some of the roles that I've been in, we were not DevOps centered at all. We hadn't started that journey yet. We were just, dipping our toes in. But organizationally, everybody was like, things look good from here. We're still, doing our thing and delivering, and our uptime still looks fine. But that doesn't mean that you can't take the position that you're in as that person in the middle and bring those two sides together and start operating in that way. Because at the end of the day, it's going to save you a lot of, heartache as well.
Agree. I hope that helped. I'm getting there's a lot of chat going on in the chats, and I love it because, those who resist the way often need to feel confident. And that's exactly what we're saying. And, I came from a software company before coming to Progress, and we were not in that space where we had DevOps or DevSecOps culture. And now that I'm in a company that totally embraces it, I see such a change. And, our jobs are very stressful and we all work very hard, but somehow it decreases that stress level just a little bit. Yeah. So let's see. This is great. So as organization, okay, so let's talk about scaling. And as organizations or enterprises scales to meet demand, how is continuous compliance achieved?
Yeah. So, you really have to be on board with what continuous compliance means. And that means that you have some standards or enforcement arm that's happening from an automation perspective. Because whenever you mention at scale, it has to be automated. So I think at a fundamental level, I've talked in the past about an aversion to standards. And early in DevOps and early in the conversations about making team autonomous, shifting things left, and all of that talk, there was sometimes an inherent misunderstanding of what that meant. And so everybody was like, more tools, and I need this tool. And even though we have this other tool that does the same thing, I want this one, so I'm getting this one. And nobody wanted to put standards in place because that might slow things down, or that felt too red tapey, because we were coming from DevOps. We were coming from an era where everything was red tape. You had change management, you had approvals, you had an approved list of software. You could only do what the organization had already done, and you had to work within this box. So when you talk about scale and continuous compliance, you start to kind of broach in that standards territory. When you say compliance, that means governance, that means standards. And so you have to, define that you are still promoting, moving fast and, delivering what you need and using the tool that you need to make that delivery. But at the same time, as an organization, you have risk to maintain. You have risk that you have to lower. And so, I think once you get your organization understanding that standards aren't bad, you can do standards without introducing red tape and slowness. I think once you do that, then you can achieve continuous compliance. And, you can insert shameless plug for really any number of tools, but at the end of the day, it needs to be automated, and you need to get rid of the bias against standards. As an industry, I think we've moved away from that fear in many cases. But again, as companies start to embrace DevOps, their first thought is get rid of these crufty policies.
Right.
So yeah.
Which is interesting because in the IT world, we're so used to compliance being, yes, we need to be compliant. We need to not get fined. We need to have these, if I could have a cookbook that I could just drop in and have all this so I don't have to manually do it, that's great. But then when you talk cross-functional and outside the IT organization, you're right. Compliance is scary. And that's something that just dawned on me thinking outside of the world of the IT world. thinking of like the other C levels that maybe don't think about it. Those are like audit, red flag, it's that negativity on that. So that's good point. Well made.
And you really have to think about not jumping either on like, oh, we had this finding or whatever, so we immediately need to lock everything down. And as an organization, you have to be able to change a little more. My mantra that I kind of live by, and I share it with my team too, is that I don't want to be testifying before Congress. So let's not do anything that puts us in a situation where we have to make those considerations. We want to eliminate our risk. We want to remain compliant. We want to meet these standards. How do we do that in an automated fashion? And how do we ensure that things stay that way? After we push it out, we're kind of the beginning of the funnel. So after we push it out, how do we make sure things stay that way? And so, I think once you get rid of that aversion to standards, and once you understand that, it's not going to hinder your ability to deliver if you do it right, and you get everybody thinking the same way, then you can implement continuous compliance.
Excellent. I'm going to pause here for a minute in case anyone has any other questions. I want to give you guys and you ladies and humans an opportunity to ask whatever questions you can, because I think talk all day to Brittany about her expertise and what her future trends are in tech stack and all that. So, okay, well, let's take a look. I do have another question. Through the digital transformation process, what should IT teams consider from a tech stack perspective?
So that's fun. So
a little question. Just a little
right.
one.
I don't know if anybody's seen, I think it's like CNCF, list of technology that's, DevOps related. It's huge. It's massive. There's any number of tools that you should look at or use or might not need to look at. I think the better answer to that question, instead of listing off a list of tools, is to consider where your organization's at. So in every position that I've been in, it's been early in the DevOps implementation. There was still a lot of servers that were being managed, still a lot of things that needed done in that way. So that's where configuration management played a huge role. That's where Chef played a huge role, and implementing it. So that's one tech that comes to mind. Obviously, Terraform comes to mind. If you're not automating, building out your cloud resources, that's where Terraform comes in. But again, any number of things will get you where you need. I think the bigger question is, be open to change. And that's not even a question, but the bigger thing is be open to change in your environment. Look at what you need to achieve. And there's any number of industry standard tools out there that will get you what you need. But also when you're making those considerations, also really put stake in what you actually need. And what I'm trying to say here is that, Kubernetes solves an actual problem. Kubernetes is cool, and that's the thing everybody's doing. But Kubernetes is an entire mouthful to bite off all at once. There is a huge rabbit hole of things that you have to implement or consider for Kubernetes, and it doesn't make the most sense for everything. So make sure that when you're looking at these tools, even though they're like a buzzword, make sure that it makes sense in your environment to implement for what you're trying to achieve. Because maybe Kubernetes does make sense, but maybe there's something that would get you what you need better.
Yeah, Kubernetes seems to be the cool cat.
Yeah.
Containers and all that.
Yeah.
So we have a new question, and this is a good one. Can you elaborate on DevOps standards in context of ISO and other standards? Best source to find relevant best practices for DevOps.
Yeah. So, you have, I think whenever you refer to ISO, you're referring to like the ISO compliance standards that you would follow. So DevOps is less of a standard and more of a mentality, really, that your organization is taking for how they're going to, achieve operational success. So I don't know that they stack up identically, and I may be misunderstanding your question. But the point really that we're trying to make is that as we transition into DevOps and as organizations like march down this path, that you don't, step in a no ops situation where you're like, we're doing the DevOps. That means developers are responsible for operations. So we don't need operations. We're making the point that it's a role shift and a mentality shift in how your business does business. And in doing so, there's a whole host of considerations you have to make. Some of those being, audit standards and compliance, and how DevOps and, working across lines and bridging those gaps and getting everybody at the same seat at the table instead of just functioning on their individual teams. Getting everybody at that same seat makes those easier. So it makes, complying with ISO standards or DISA or STIG DISA makes STIG, but CIS standards or whatever you're following, it makes all of those easier to do and implement continuously and in, an automated, consistent fashion. I hope that answers your question. If it didn't, feel free to be like, you're a psycho. I need you to actually answer what I said. And then just like rephrase it if you wouldn't mind, and I'll give it another go.
Let's see. And there was one. Do you see the next one? It was, yet it can be measured. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is that a spinoff of what we just talked about, the DevOps standards?
Potentially. So with DevOps, there's any number of ways you can measure DevOps. I wouldn't say that I'm a super big fan of putting in like metrics that says we have the DevOps, because again, DevOps is more of a cultural shift and a shift in how you're actually achieving your company's goals. But you can look at ways that you're structured. You can measure it by how teams are working across functions. You can measure it on, how many roadblocks teams hit that they're not able to knock out of their way on their own. How many bottlenecks do you have? Are teams able to deliver faster after you've started giving them more autonomy? Things like that. So you can measure it in that way, but I think this is more of a cultural paradigm as opposed to a measurement. It is measured in context of maturity levels. So that was another question. So some organizations that are incredibly mature, actually, I'm not even going to try to speak to that because Dr. Nicole Forsgren speaks to that in Accelerates, which is a book. In Accelerate, they talk about maturity models for DevOps. There's also a DevOps state. I think it's State of DevOps report is what it's officially called. I'm not sure who puts it out now. I know different companies sponsor it. Yeah. Michelle's got the book.
Yeah, but right handy.
Yeah, but there are ways you can measure your maturity. And there are guidelines in, that book. The State of DevOps report kind of says this is what very mature DevOps organizations are doing. This is how they're working and functioning. I think sometimes it even breaks into these are the processes and tools that they're using. But Dr. Nicole Forsgren and her team speak to that well better than I do. I've just been a practitioner of DevOps. I've just helped kind of usher it in. But there are systems of measure that are in place to say, maybe you're at the front end of the spectrum or maybe you're very mature.
Yeah. Cool. Now the questions are coming in. They're coming in hot,
Yeah.
So how to make easier. So the difference between DevOps and dev and ops and sec teams who are used to a different pace. How do you minimize the friction?
Yeah. So that's really a good one. So
if I had that answer, I might be publishing a book. No,
this is right. Yeah, go for it, Michelle. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking, I think that you have to have that open dialogue, and you have to have your leadership that's speaking on, hey, I hate to sound hokey, but we're in this together, and we're going to be in it together from the beginning and not silo and have you guys at phases where we have that transparency and we have that culture again, and then open dialogue that we see a sprint or we have a JIRA case and we see that information and we see that those are all working together in a parallel path. And I think that if they understand all the good that could come from it, again, you're saving time, your compliance is increased, you have less errors, less rework, less, or I should say more success on launching on time and not having a stopgap. I think with all of that, that is the information that needs to be explained to the team when they're converting over to 3 different teams into stilts. And Brittany, you might be able to talk about this more eloquently than I did, but that's my, everybody works at their own pace, but hey, you have your end date where something has to go to market or be launched, and we work backwards with that and we work together so we know that there's no surprises.
Yeah, I think what I'd add here is that organizationally, you have to kind of set your teams up for success. So it doesn't become a question of, you have the security team that's got, a delivery deadline of, I don't know, 6 months from now, which conflicts with operations, who has a delivery deadline of 10 minutes from now. And then the development teams that have a delivery deadline of in 2 weeks, right? I think organizationally, you have to set teams up for success, facilitate at a higher level, the blending of those teams, the blending of the priorities for your organization, and the blending of the expectations. Yes, you can start this at a grassroots level. Yes, you can push these, and you're going to have to get everybody together, and there may be conflicting timelines, like you mentioned. But as an organization, I don't want to say the most successful DevOps implementations, because I've only been a part of, so many, but what I've seen be the most successful in my experience is when you have the organizational backing, that gets rid of that conflicting priority. And it allows you to achieve an answer together, as opposed to coming to the table and saying, you know what, I'm not going to get that for you for 6 months. So can't happen. Sorry. You have to have some level of organizational backing.
Agree. Well, this is fantastic. So, Brittany, what types of future trends do you anticipate when it comes to optimizing the digital transformation process?
Right. So, probably 2 years ago, I said that I thought that, compliance and compliance as code was going to become, more of a thing, because we were seeing more of a shift toward, bringing security to the table, right? DevSecOps was a thing that had been talked about. A lot of organizations were trying it. So I think now that organizations are, starting to bring everyone to the table, I think what we're going to start to see are more mature DevOps implementations. The original DevOps kind of had everybody sort of lumped in there, and security was like a given. But I think this enhanced or renewed focus on security, I think, is going to help not lessen the threat vector, obviously, because CVEs happen constantly. But I think it's going to lessen the friction that you have organizationally. And I think organizations are going to be more mature as a result.
I would concur.
Yeah.
I think you need to give us some winning lottery numbers as well, because I do see that shift. I know Gartner's report is coming out, and more and more enterprises and organizations are shifting that left and seeing how it's really helping not only their KPIs, it's helping their culture, and it's making for smoother development. So that's excellent. You know what I like about this as well, and chef, it's funny we talk about the table and having a seat at the table. Just a little bit of background: chef was actually originated in Seattle, Washington, and in our headquarters in Seattle we had a big table. Like, we actually called it a big table, and it seated probably 25 people, because we wanted to make sure everyone had a seat at that table at that time. So it's funny when we talk about that table, because I think it's important. And, even if you do have a seat at the table and you're doing that grassroots startup and you're thinking, hey, this is something that I need to explore. Hey, as long as you have a seat and you can hear and give your opinion, you don't have to be an expert. And this is actually going to give you the tools and the responsibility to fill those gaps, because it might be that one sentence that you say 50 times to 50 people that finally gels and connects with the people at the table. So I know we like to help bridge the transition and skills gaps with our technologies, with visibility and data across all the environments. So I know I'm looking forward to our next step. And I know that we have a big launch that's coming out on May 25th. So look for that, because we're really going to go into more detail about DevSecOps and CSMP and how we can make things even better. Brittany, it was a delight as always. Do we have another question? Did I see?
There's one more question, and there is a comment that I also wanted to touch on too.
Okay, go for it.
So the comment was about security being a key factor based on, today's environment, that it's too risky to go live, in production with security holes. And I think that's really, really the driving force behind bringing everyone together, because that's a critical element that, is kind of missing from the conversation, at least historically. So, teams are focusing more on reliability, and whatever that means. And so reliability is, tested software that doesn't have crazy user impact in terms of bugs. It means fast delivery to fix those bugs. It means stable architecture, whether that's servers or whether that's serverless. It means security. And it means that your users don't have to worry about, whenever they're on that system, that it being taken down because of a DDoS attack, or it being, insecure and you losing all of their personal information and popping up on their credit report, 6 months later. So I think that shift to considering everything and making, security everyone's, I don't want to say problem, but making security everyone's concern, I think helps us mature and helps us get to that point of reliability.
Well said.
Yeah. And then the other question, I know we're really close to time, but the other question that's on here is about agile methodologies like Scrum and Kanban versus DevOps. And so, agile, I look at it as a way of working, right? So I'm going to have epics and features and user stories to break down my work into chunks that I can complete and, plan based on my capacity. Whereas DevOps it's a way of working, but it's not a way of completing that work. So DevOps is, I want my development teams to have the tools that they need to not have to rely on Brittany on the server team to build them a server. They should just be able to do their thing, self-service, manage that system while still meeting compliance. So that's kind of the difference. While Agile, like Scrum, Kanban is a way of completing the work, DevOps is a way of, tackling your organizational efficiency.
I hope that helped. Did that help? I thought that was a good explanation.
Yeah.
So, Michelle, Brittany, I am going to have to cut you off as we are at the top of the hour, but any last words before we close out?
From my side, I would just say always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm happy to lend any advice that I can from the experience that I have. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a website. You can find it on my LinkedIn. But always feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer any kind of questions that you might have after we're done here.
Definitely. Can I say ditto? I don't have a website though. No, really, I enjoyed this. It went by so fast, and I hope that we gave you a lot to think about and actually gave you morsels that you can take with you and incorporate even after this call. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate. I'm always around. LinkedIn, I'm on. I think it's in the bio. So definitely don't be strangers, because I love to network and get to know what the pain points are and where we need to go next and how we can help.
Yeah.
Awesome. Brittany, Michelle, thank you so much for being here with us today, for, filling an hour with just constant information. That was just, it was awesome feedback today. Awesome. Quickly, I would like to remind our audience that the session was recorded. Following this panel, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. I did promise we'd be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our first winner is Philip T. Our second winner is Kathy M. Our third winner is Andrew H. And our fourth and final winner is Shushmita B. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. And if you don't receive an email, just check your spam folder. I would like to thank Progress Chef for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. We appreciate not only you being here with us today, but your lively participation in helping drive today's conversation. We ask for just 1 extra minute of your time to fill out a quick post-webinar survey that should pop up on your screen here in just a moment. But otherwise, we do hope to see you at a future upcoming Techstrong Learning webinar. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And Brittany, Michelle, thank you so much once more.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.